Welcome back to New Rockstars, I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the sequel to the billion-dollar 2018 Aquaman, and now the final film of the DC Extended Universe. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom came out right in the middle of my paternity leave, and now that the film is on digital, and now that I know this movie wasn't going to trigger parents of newborns by following the Black Manta Death of a Prince storyline exactly, I can now break down this movie scene by scene, like all the other DCEU films, to point out the Easter eggs, details you missed, and where I think Batman was going to be in this movie before his scenes were removed. And yes, as a father to a newborn, I spent way too much time looking into some details they put in the first act of this movie, and I have proof that Aquaman is a freak who drinks Mera's breast milk to stay jacked, and a guy who, I guess, likes stinky messes. After some sub-aquatic opening studio titles, we open on a stormy night as the vessel named the Sawyer II is being attacked by pirates, and Aquaman, Jason Momoa, glides in on his seahorse Storm. The first film also began with Arthur Curry attacking pirates, Black Manta's crew, stopping them from attacking a Russian submarine. This film begins a similar way, and I think there's a reason for that. But I do love how Storm the Seahorse lets out this little horse whinny. The character of Storm first appeared in Aquaman number 23 in 1965. He's known as acting as Aquaman's personal mode of transportation on the high seas. Storm doesn't have a tremendously huge history. He just kind of appears whenever Aquaman needs to get somewhere. But as Arthur shares his name with King Arthur, it's nice to see him as a kind of knight on horseback. Aquaman narrates his own story here in this intro, saying,
"I talk to fish."
That is what Ben Affleck's Batman mockingly says to him when they first met in Justice League.
"The Aquaman. I hear you can talk to fish."
But here, Aquaman is owning it. This whole prologue can be seen as Arthur using his own action figure to present a version of himself to his son. It's kind of like in Marvel, Loki restaging the events of Thor: The Dark World as a play in the opening minutes of Thor: Ragnarok. And so I think we can look at this opening scene on the Sawyer II as being told from an unreliable narrator. The music Born to Be Wild from the band Steppenwolf plays, and yes, we are hearing from a band named Steppenwolf, and Aquaman literally fought Steppenwolf in Justice League. Born to Be Wild was used in the 1969 motorcycle film Easy Rider, and at the end of the prologue, we do see Jason Momoa doing donuts on what appears to be his own motorcycle, a custom 1956 Harley-Davidson Panhead. But in some shots, it weirdly has a headlamp, and others it does not. And the audience for this unreliable narrator story is Arthur's baby son, Arthur Jr., and thankfully, this movie does not commit infanticide as many of us worried it would, based off the fact that Black Manta kills baby Arthur in Adventures Comics number 452 in 1977, the Death of a Prince storyline, but that fear is totally channeled as a plot point here in this movie. Now, Arthur Jr. pees on Arthur, and then later Arthur dodges a pee, but the baby and Mera, I guess, use water bending abilities to redirect the pee at Arthur. And I have to say, as a father to a newborn son myself, I found this pee joke to be, well, somewhat relatable at first, but straight up weird the second time it happens, like when Arthur makes a game out of it by dodging it. Like, all of you parents of sons out there, you know how it goes. It happens once, maybe a few times, and then quickly you learn to cover it with a wet wipe or a cloth, and then you change your kid from the side, and you like turn him. You never go straight down the runway uncovered every time and then laugh when he pees on your floor. I just kind of interpret this as Arthur being a guy who spends half his time in the ocean and looks like he smells like driftwood, just not caring if his home smells like this. But then again, considering Jason Momoa in this movie wears the same Royal Hawaiian Hotel bathrobe that he wore in an Earth Day Instagram post where he is sleeping in a van in a parking lot and is making a big sloppy mess, he clearly just walked onto set wearing whatever he was wearing that day, and I just can't imagine this guy cares that much what anything smells like. Now, throughout this opening sequence, we see Amber Heard returning as Mera. Yeah! She gives birth to Arthur Jr. via a water birth, and I'm pretty sure that newborn is partially CG or is like a closed mouth prop with CG added, because take a look at that mouth. That's definitely a visual effect to make the mouth stretch open like that. After Amber Heard's high-profile legal disputes with Johnny Depp, there have been various reports that her role in this film was cut down during the reshoot process. Her reduced role, along with things like Willem Dafoe Vulko being killed off screen, were just part of the restructuring that may have led to this film feeling pretty disjointed. In July 2022, it was actually reported that Ben Affleck would appear as Batman in this movie, and the Hollywood Reporter claimed that Michael Keaton filmed a scene for this movie as his version of Bruce Wayne to follow up his appearance in The Flash. But this Michael Keaton scene was pretty confusing to test audiences, which is why Ben Affleck reportedly joined these reshoots. But then after various recuts of this movie and various new rounds of test screenings, the final version of the film excluded both Affleck and Keaton. So you may be asking, where in Aquaman 2 would Batman have fit in? I think it is in this opening montage, and it explains a lot of what I've been talking about. Like, notice we cut away away from the ending of the Sawyer 2 with this gag of Momoa kicking a pirate, and we match cut on him kicking his father Thomas's chair. And that crew of the boat just cheers like a group of kids, and doesn't it kind of seem like that's the kind of reception Arthur would want from his son, to cheer at his heroics? We never learn much about the Sawyer 2's circumstances, like how that all got wrapped up, how they got into it. The scene just seems weirdly cut short. I think Batman was going to appear in an early in the movie cameo on this boat, the way Wonder Woman cameos in the opening sequence of The Flash. I think Arthur was gonna have a Batman action figure in his story to his baby son. And the joke was that when we cut to this fictitious story, it was going to be Michael Keaton Batman, because that would be the Batman from Arthur's childhood imagination, rather than the Batman from the real world. And that would reveal this whole Sawyer 2 incident to just be his fantasy, where he would be washing away his guilt from the messier pirate rescue where Black Manta's father got killed. But my theory is that when they tried to put this in front of test audiences, they were like, wait, why is Batman Michael Keaton? I don't get it. Like, are you saying Michael Keaton is the Batman of the DCEU? So then Warner's like, they don't get it. And then they're like, okay, fine, we'll just reshoot it so that it'll be the normal DCEU Ben Affleck Batman. But then audiences were like, wait, we don't get that either. So then Warner was just like, screw it, no Batman for anyone. I honestly think that, or some version of that, is what happened here. Like, I'm 72% certain. And really what fuels my theory is that Jason Momoa received a story by credit for this movie. That's pretty rare for a lead actor in a superhero movie. Like, Edward Norton definitely got story by for the 2008 Hulk film. Paul Rudd got co-screenplay credit for the 2015 Ant-Man movie, but that's just because he and Adam McKay basically took over that script when Edgar Wright left the project. So what was Jason Momoa's contribution to the story? I think it was just because the actor improvised a lot of this fight with the action figures, and it was going to be this film's whole opening arc to have an Aquaman Batman fantasy team up from his point of view. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. A new year is a great excuse for finally tackling the stuff that you put off last year. And if one of the things you've been putting off until 2024 is taking proper care of your mental health, BetterHelp can help you get started. And hey, no judgment for waiting. Starting therapy can be hard, and the right therapist for you might not be in your area, and some people struggle with the face-to-face interaction of therapy. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, as a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. Whatever is the most comfortable version of therapy for you. Just click the link in the description and answer a few questions about what you're looking for from therapy and what your preferences are. BetterHelp will then match you with the therapist from their network that's right for you. If you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a therapist for no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who is in your network, or anything like that. If you think you might benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/newrockstars. Clicking that link helps support this channel and also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist to see if it helps you. Now, in this man cave at their home, you can see a license plate on the wall reading Hunk 357, and then Thomas is reading a blue book titled My Mystery Ships. If you look closely, this is actually a personal account from a British Rear Admiral Gordon Campbell about his experience with German U-boats during World War I, which I kind of see as a setup for Black Manta's crew commandeering Atlantean tech and mystery submarines. And as we see the rest of Arthur's life since the events of the first film, cheering at an illegal cage fight that he breaks up and participates in, is actually a human deep sea diver. I think this is Peter Mortimer, the Scavenger, an Aquaman villain from the comics. Thanks to Brandon Barrick and Hector Navarro for helping me find that one. And of course, Tamora Morrison returns as Thomas Curry, and it's just great to see the guy's stardom since the 2018 film increase as he's returned to play Boba Fett in the Star Wars series on Disney+. They share some Guinnesses, just like they did in the pub in the previous film. Jason Momoa is a huge drinker of Guinness, and in fact, he credited drinking Guinness for helping him achieve his enviable physique for the scene where he swims away from Bruce Wayne shirtless in Justice League. Momoa even had his own line of Guinness beer back in 2016. Apparently, his personal trainer has structured his entire diet and his carb intake around drinking a Guinness a day. But bear with me here. Inside this fridge, dangerously close to these Guinnesses, are several bottles of Mera's breast milk. I count 10 bottles, and every single one of them is full, over 8 ounces each. So in total, that is like 85 ounces, which again, parents of newborns out there, Jesus Christ, that is a lot to keep in the fridge at any given time. Mera would have to be pumping round the clock, or just maybe expressing a lot per day. And I don't think Arthur Jr. would be feeding that much. Like at peak, when babies this age are breastfeeding, it's like at most like 24 ounces per day. But notice the more important detail is that none of these bottles are labeled. When you're on like pumping rotation like that, you always label them to know when that milk came out and when it's getting close to expiring, especially if you're just refrigerating it as opposed to deep freezing it. So who knows when this milk supply was pumped, but I assume the fact that none of them are labeled is that they all came from just that day, because you only label things if you're doing it over the course of multiple days. So no kid this size is taking in 80 ounces of breast milk per day. I don't care if he's like 3/4 Atlantean. The kid's stomach could only be a certain size. So why am I ranting about this? Here's what I'm getting at, folks. I believe Arthur Curry is drinking Mera's breast milk. That's why he keeps it in his beer fridge. He doesn't care when it came out. This guy's just guzzling it down, because there is a weird trend of bodybuilders paying for black market breast milk. This is a thing I guess some people do. I believe that's why Mera's off screen for most of this movie. Our girl's pumping. So yeah, Warner, you didn't think a daddy of a newborn would be breaking down your freaky little movie, did ya? I'm on to you. Okay, so Thomas gives Arthur some words of advice in Māori. In the DCEU, Thomas Curry is Māori, making Arthur of Māori descent. In the first film, we actually saw them do hongi, which is a traditional greeting in Māori culture. That's where two people touch their noses and their foreheads together. Arthur also wears a jade around his neck, which is a greenstone found in New Zealand that has long been used by Māori people to make fishing hooks, weapons, and jewelry. And we learn that Arthur Jr. can also telepathically communicate with sea creatures, setting up his distress beacon to his father in the final act. So the title of Aquaman the Lost Kingdom comes out of a giant glacier that cracks on the other side of young Arthur's aquarium to foreshadow how Kordax, this movie's primary villain, will appear in the movie as he is thawed out of ice. Moving on to the Arctic base of the mercenaries led by David Kane, aka Black Manta, with Yahya Abdul-Mateen II back reprising his role from 2018's Aquaman. He's again a major antagonist in this movie. The camera pans on his damaged battlesuit, which David wore in Sicily when he was defeated by Aquaman in the first movie. Randall Park returns as Dr. Stephen Shin. That was a scientist whose rantings about the existence of Atlantis had him dismissed as a crackpot. But in the post-credit scene of the first movie, Shin has rescued Black Manta, implying that the two have an alliance in order to find Atlantis, and that's where we find them now. When Dr. Shin and a fellow scientist fall into a deep crevice, they encounter an unseen tentacle monster who drags one of them away. The creature is simply titled Tentacle, based on the VFX artist portfolio page on ArtStation. They say
it was all probably solid ice until we started heating the planet.
Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom contains a not-so-subtle commentary on climate change. The titular Lost Kingdom of the film is an ancient evil frozen in ice that's slowly being thawed out due to worldwide warming temperatures. One of the real concerns about climate change is the thawing of ancient diseases and bacteria, which we as humans would be biologically unprepared to deal with. Just another thing to keep y'all up at night, because if I'm not sleeping, neither are you. And I love the details that this place was frozen rather quickly, rather than something that occurred over eons of time, but rather some kind of magic from Atlan, because look at those birds, they were frozen mid-flight in the ice. And a quick reminder that the 7 kingdoms are Atlantis, Zebel, that's the kingdom of Mera and her father Nereus. The Fishermen, that's the most technologically advanced of the kingdoms. These are the folks who have fishtails instead of legs. The Brine, that's home to the crustacean-like people and the undersea volcanoes. The Trench, that's home of the Trench. It's a sightless nocturnal subspecies, and that's how you would get to the Hidden Sea in Dead King's Island from the first film. The Deserters, that's a kingdom of ruins under the Sahara Desert. And in this film, the Lost Kingdom, which we will learn is Necrus, where Kordax ruled. David holds up the pieces of the Black Trident, and we get a glimpse of Kordax, which is kind of presented as a horror demonic force. Kordax is later explained to be the brother of King Atlan, which makes him distantly related to Aquaman. In the comics, Necrus was actually ruled by a different character, a villain named Mungo. Meanwhile, Kordax was also in the comics as an exiled member of the Atlantean royal family. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom kind of combines multiple characters. 5 months later, the TV broadcast is showing the Global Broadcasting System, or GBS, reporting on the spiking global temperatures. GBS has appeared in the DCEU before in titles such as Man of Steel, Shazam, and the first Aquaman. It's kind of like the WHIH of the DCEU. The Council of Houses calls an emergency meeting due to another plague outbreak. This council is led by Karshan, led by India Moore, who in the comics is an anthropomorphic tiger shark, but in this film is a human-looking woman. Karshan's tiger shark form is a foe to both Aquaman and Green Lantern in the comics, but here is just kind of more of a political adversary. Also playing one of the members of the council is Natalia Safran, who is the wife of producer and co-CEO of DC Studios, Peter Safran. She also played Kaleidoscope in the Suicide Squad. We learned that Vulko, Arthur's mentor from the first film, played by Willem Dafoe, was killed recently off-screen during one of these plagues, which yeah, it's just COVID, right? According to director James Wan, this was a scheduling conflict, but it's still just kind of weird to not have him here. Black Manta, Dr. Shin, and the crew use an ancient Atlantean submarine to sneak into Atlantis, and we see that Dr. Shin has been finding these old ships and retrofitting them with new tech in the last 5 months. Just 5 months! But really what fuels it is Orichalcum. Orichalcum is a real-world metal that is recounted in the origin story of Atlantis by Plato. The word is Greek for mountain copper, and it's considered to have a traditional copper red color, not like the green it appears to have in this movie, although the copper does turn green when corroded by salt water. That's how verdigris is formed. The color of corrosion also hints at how toxic it is. In the DC Comics, Orichalcum also has the ability to astral project and influence intelligent beings, which explains how Kordax is able to possess Black Manta and fill his mind with institutional and ancient knowledge after he picks up the Trident. On the approach to the Atlantean Vault, TOPO appears! In the comics, TOPO is a very intelligent octopus who assists Aquaman, who made his first comics appearance in Adventure Comics 229 in 1956. He's gone through several reinterpretations in the comics over the years, appearing with a more humanoid-like appearance in the post-Crisis DC and becoming more monstrous like Cthulhu in the New 52 era. You may remember TOPO was actually that drumming octopus in the first Aquaman film during Arthur's battle with Orm in the arena. Atlanta explains that TOPO here stands for Tactical Operations and Pursuit Operative, and she does reference TOPO's musical talents as we saw before.
He also plays a variety of musical instruments.
When the alarms are triggered, Black Manta's crew member Stingray steers the ancient sub toward the Atlantis entrance gate. All hell breaks loose in Atlantis. We see Atlantis' markets, and at the center of the city is a giant statue of King Atlan. I really do love the design of everything in Atlantis. The vessels include animal-inspired designs like shark jet skis, a giant sea turtle ship, there's manta ray-inspired fighter ships. It all looks really vibrant and really cool. Mera gets blasted by Black Manta's energy beam while Arthur stops an out-of-control train, and I've ranted about this before, but like, I don't understand how the passengers of this thing would be at risk when they are underwater. Like, couldn't they just swim out the windows and then like slowly glide to a stop on their own? Like, with the buoyancy forces, gravity isn't really the same underwater. So are they really gonna be in that much danger if they like abandon ship? King Nereus returns to this movie, played by Dolph Lundgren. He explains Black Manta's new weapons that use ultrasonic energy to disrupt the nervous system. To break Orm out of his prison in the Deserter Kingdom, Nereus gives Arthur a special blue stealth suit. The blue suit first showed up in the 1986 Aquaman miniseries designed by Neil Posner as a part of the series that had Aquaman and Mera in Florida that allowed him to camouflage in the water. James Wan posted that he and writer David Leslie Johnson were inspired by the 80s blue suit and said that it was Atlantean tech based on a cephalopod's camouflaging ability. Orm is guarded by blood-drinking deserters. Deserters being an Atlantean tribe who in the comics were the last kingdom to be accepted into Atlantis by King Atlan during his reign. Nereus explains that the deserters are vampiric who turned to surviving on blood instead of water when the Sahara went dry. During the making of the Lost Kingdom, James Wan intentionally wanted to pay homage to a number of Ray Harryhausen sci-fi movies, one of them the 1965 Planet of the Vampires. During the prison break sequence, Arthur references Castaway. That's a Tom Hanks Robert Zemeckis film where Hanks ends up looking like Patrick Wilson does here. And speaking of Wilson, Tom Hanks befriends a volleyball named Wilson in that movie. Later on, Arthur references Azkaban. That's a prison from the Harry Potter series. Also during their bickering, you may have noticed that Arthur says that he beat Orm with, quote, no prep time, which is a common bit when DC fans debate who Batman could beat, saying that with enough prep time, Batman could beat anyone, which is true, he could. Now, Orm's initially thin appearance was likely the result of a body double under that beard and that wig, because Wilson reportedly did 400-pound deadlifts to get in his jacked shape for this role. Joel Adrian is credited as Wilson's body double, but that guy looks pretty ripped too, so I don't think it's him, but there is another stunt actor named Felix Leach who did stunts for Aquaman 2, and he is an accomplished dancer who's in very good shape, better shape than I'll ever be, but he does have a more slender build, and I think he might have played skinny Orm. Arthur and Orm bicker on their way to the Sunken Citadel. Sunken Citadel made of sunken ships from around the world. Orm describes it as
the one place in the world where the scum of the land and sea mingle.
Yes, certainly an homage to Obi-Wan Kenobi's Yelp review of the Mos Eisley Cantina.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
And we meet Kingfish, voiced by comedian Martin Short. Kingfish and the Sunken Citadel quite obviously bring up comparisons to Jabba the Hutt, who had his own den of thieves on Tatooine in his palace. There's a roulette wheel with a bouncing pearl and a wheel of oysters. Aquaman gets information out of Kingfish by suffocating him. In the comics, this is actually how Aqua Baby gets killed. Black Manta put him in a sphere, which was slowly filled with air, something that child could not breathe. But again, don't worry, he doesn't die in this movie. We get to Black Manta's refinery, which is built on an island known as the Devil's Deep. Arthur taunts his brother over the fact that he's never had burgers or pizza or steak. Arthur tricks Orm into eating a cockroach, which he calls the shrimp of the land. This comes up later in the post-credit scene when Orm adds a bug to his cheeseburger. Arthur tells Orm,
look, Loki, I'm not asking for your advice on this.
Aha, Loki! Whether an intentional nod to Marvel or just to Norse mythology, Arthur's name drop of Loki when talking to Orm does kind of remind us of the fraught relationship between Thor and his adopted brother Loki in the MCU. Arthur and Orm break into the base and take out a bunch of henchmen before Dr. Shin finds them and surrenders. Arthur wants to knock him out and says he better start talking or...
Only you want Sasa.
So Sasa is a Samoan word meaning to hit or strike, basically something you did not want to hear your parents say. And thanks to friend of the channel Tom Michelson for helping us out with the background on that. So Stingray and the crew fire up the Octobots. They're not linked directly to anything in the comics, but director James Wan wanted to create designs that evoke the 60s era of DC Comics, telling Entertainment Weekly, quote, everything about the Lost Kingdom came from my love for the Silver Age Aquaman comic book, which is a 1960s comic comic book, so everything about it has a very retro feel. Black Manta shows up in a very comic accurate new look, complete with a solid black muscle suit and chrome helmet. Orm grabs the black trident and gets a good look at Necrus, the Lost Kingdom. King Nereus shows up and destroys the Devil's Deep as Black Manta and the crew escape. Nereus, Atlanta, Mera, and the returning Brine King, voiced once again by John Rhys Davies, reunite with Arthur and Orm. The Brine King hilariously brings up the climactic battle in the first Aquaman film, where, yes, Orm sliced off the Brine King's right claw. Orm details a war waged between the brothers King Atlan and Kordax, the latter of whom thirsted for the right to rule and used the Orichalcum to seek it, as well as constructing the Black Trident. Atlan won the war and sealed Kordax in the ice, wiping Necrus from the record of Atlantis. For Arthur, however, it's a warning to not allow the feud with a brother to continue and to reconcile, or else the world could be destroyed. Because Atlan used blood magic to seal Kordax in his prison, he needs Atlan's blood to escape, which still exists in the royal DNA, and they realize Aqua Baby is a new target. Yikes! But thank God the kid's just kidnapped. Manta's eyes glow red in the dark, like many descriptions of the cryptid known as the Mothman. It's very, very creepy. I don't know how anything that bulky could creep around a house, but still, scary. Arthur and the gang arrive to find the lighthouse in ruins. Junior's gone, but Dr. Shin sends a secret signal to let Aquaman know where they are heading. So Arthur rides Storm into battle. He calls upon the whales and dolphins of the ocean to hit Manta's ship with strong sonar to take out its cannon. As they battle their way into Necrus, Black Mantis draws his blade above the baby. Remember, this is the same knife he earlier told to Dr. Shin, I never draw this blade unless it's gonna taste blood. So Aquaman arrives and yells, "Get away from my son!" So there is an improv game called Give Me Back My Son, where you scream Mel Gibson's line from the movie Ransom, "Give me back my son!" And you scream this in each other's faces, trying to make each other laugh. Zach Woods actually played this with Conan O'Brien and Andy Richter on Conan. Give me back my son! 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 And I bring this up because I feel like Jason Momoa is channeling this improv exercise when he says, "Get away from my son!" Because Jason Momoa actually took improv classes at UCB, the same theater where Zach Woods did improv. As Black Manta and Aquaman clash tridents, Kordax is taken over.
You wear my brother's armor and wield his trident, but you're only half the man he was.
So Kordax Orm spills Arthur's blood, breaking the blood magic, and Kordax awakens. But Orm hands Arthur his trident, which Arthur throws, splintering Kordax's trident with his own. So Necrus begins to collapse and Arthur tries to save David Kane, but Black Manta says never and plunges into the depths. So in the aftermath, the Brine King, we learn, lost another claw. They let Orm loose, planning to tell everyone he died in the battle. In the final montage, several news stations report on the reveal of Atlantis to the world, similar to the ending of Black Panther, when T'Challa revealed Wakanda's true nature in front of the UN. They have this UN in an outdoor gathering with folding chairs at Ellis Island, I suppose to symbolize Atlantis arriving at the shores of the surface world as a kind of immigrant group. We see Orm trying to eat a cheeseburger. That is actually on the Malibu Pier. And yes, we do see him in the post-credit scene putting a bug on his burger. The waitress who serves him is actually Ingrid Bisu, the wife of director James Wan. But don't go telling that to everyone who hates James Gunn, because they believe that directors putting their friends and loved ones in movies is nepotistic and evil. Even though this is something every director, from Christopher Nolan to Martin Scorsese, they all do it in their movies, folks. And yeah, that includes your Lord and Savior Zack Snyder, who put Deborah Snyder in Batman v Superman. So please, just shut up. Arthur and his dad do a traditional Maori haka in the yard of the lighthouse. Arthur ends his speech in front of the UN with this line direct to camera.
I am Aquaman.
Ooh, okay. Just as the MCU began with Robert Downey Jr. declaring, "I am Iron Man," the DCU ends with this. I honestly can't believe the DCU signs off this way. Like, I know James Wan probably didn't intend this, but yikes. I know Marvel Studios is struggling with quality control currently, but I cannot think of a more striking contrast between a superhero cinematic universe that changed Hollywood forever by doing most of the things right, and then this other universe that did a lot of stuff wrong. In a video coming soon, I'm gonna do a full autopsy of the DCEU, because I think there are a few specific reasons why the DCEU had as much trouble as it did, but also some really shining, wonderful moments that I don't want our industry to just forget about. And in this video, I'm going to reveal my final official ranking of all DCEU movies. Can't wait for the comments on that one. Hey, if you like this video, please give us a like and subscribe to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.